Welcome. I'm Rami Khouri. I'm a journalist in residence at AUB, teaching journalism and doing public policy research, and active with my colleagues here at the Deb Center. And on behalf of the Deb Center and all their many members who have done a lot of work to get this forum going and many other things, we welcome you here. We're honored to have you here, and we should all be aware that the millions of people, especially young kids who are out in the streets today all over the world, are there in large part because of what many of you in this room have done over the years. We're aware of that at AUB. We understand the importance of linkages among academic research, teaching, and advocating legitimately through channels of civil society and peacefully, of course, and consistently on an ethical basis for values and changes around the world that we all believe in. And it's because of this work that you have done and we have done and so many people in this room have done as activists, as academics, as government officials, as civil society people in many different fields, and bringing together the two great challenges of our world today for equality and sustainability, the rights of women and the rights of the sustainable nature is an important feat, and we're pleased and honored to be part of this.
Greetings. I am Fuad Laurie, and as president of the American University of Beirut, I would like to welcome you to our beautiful Deb Center in New York City for this Feminist Forum on Climate Change. My apologies for not being with you in person, but my responsibilities are here in Beirut as we launch our academic year 2019-2020. I would first like to acknowledge Mary Robinson, former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, the former UN Special Envoy on Climate Change, former President of Ireland, and now President of the Mary Robinson Foundation Climate Justice. She also, I must add, received an honorary doctorate from AUB in 2011. Ms. Robinson is a fierce champion for climate justice for those with the least responsibility for causing it and the least resources to combat it. I would also like to recognize Mahnaz Afkami and her single-minded commitment to the global community of the Women's Learning Partnership. It is her leadership and drive that brings together the powerful voices assembled in this room. Finally, we look to the ideas that will be sparked among you, both for research and grassroots action, to effect change for coming generations. As an example, Dr. Najat Aoun Saliba brings to the table her expertise in translating cutting-edge scientific research into citizen action. I send our best wishes as you embark on this important work. Thank you.
In supporting this effort, and I hope this will be one of the beginnings of efforts that we will take on together in the future. And I'd like to welcome everybody here because you, although come from all types of backgrounds and experiences and organizations and parts of the world, one thing is present in this group, and that is passion. Passion for seeking a better world and for making us all secure and safe. And today I have the honor of introducing my good friend Mary Robinson. I think that she doesn't, of course, need an introduction, so I'll go straight to how we all got here, which was basically her idea. We had always admired Mary for her being a prototype for the kind of leader that we wished. I'm talking about the WNP partnership, a partnership of 20 countries, 20 organizations, each of them engaged with many other organizations, working in 20 languages, all working on having women leaders, not just in large numbers, but women leaders who are participatory in their decision-making, who are respectful of others, who think beyond their own interests, and ambitions, and to work together in a good and constructive manner. So Mary is the symbol of all of that. And of course, we have worked together on various issues that she has sponsored, from Women Leaders Intercultural Forum to ethical globalization, to a variety of other causes. And a little while back, she said to me that she wants to give some time to Dublin people. And of course, I was ecstatic, this would be perfect. So, knowing that she knows very well that we're engaged in leadership training, she said, listen, leadership training for women, the new leadership that changes the architecture of human relationships and the foundations of gender relations, is wonderful, and I support it fully. But there have been centuries that we have worked on something like that, or more evolving and all of that, but it's probably going to take a couple more decades or more. However, we have a very urgent existential issue that we have to focus on as we work on leadership. And that is the planet on which we live and the living things that are sustained on that planet who have very little time. So I was very happy to hear that she will support us in bringing ideas, bringing scholarship, bringing scientific research and policy making, but more importantly, because as she told me, the work of women on the ground is the most important factor in all of this. Because women are the ones who both are affected most, they and their families, affected most by climate change, but also many of the other issues that we deal with, all of us in this room, and Women's Learning Partnership in particular, whether it's poverty, refugee issues, displacement, all of the disparities that exist, work, all of that, it has to do with climate. And we owe it to ourselves and to our children to do what we can to bring these two together, to bring the policy and science to the local level and the local ideas and initiatives to the scientific community. So that's how we got here. And I'm glad to say that with all of the things that Mary has on her agenda, both to save the planet and a lot of other related issues, she made it here. And I'm truly feel blessed that we have her here. So, Mary, could you please come and engage us in this conversation? Thank you.
What's brilliant timing for the first feminist forum, and I'm correcting the title. The first feminist forum on climate justice, please. Not just climate change. I don't talk about climate change. I talk about climate crisis, climate emergency, climate breakdown, or climate justice. And I think today, what's happening? Children all over the world and supportive other adults are marching for climate justice. Millions of them are coming out all over the world, starting in Australia early this morning and last night, whatever it was for their time. And they're marching because of the Fridays for Future. What does this mean for young people? They're calling us out. They don't believe they will have a future unless we do something about it. And they're literally saying, we can't do it. We're children. You have to do it. And this is the most extraordinary day. It's been building up. But I'm telling you, people will remember this day. And I will remember it for lots of reasons, and one of them being the Feminist Forum on Climate Justice. I'm delighted to see a number of very familiar faces. I'm delighted to have brought a friend, Hindu Omari Ibrahim, who chaired the Indigenous Peoples Forum at the COP for a significant number of years, and from whom I've learned a great deal. We met on the street and she was going to the conference that I had just come from, because she thought I was going to be there. I said, no, you come with me to this other one. Anyway, that's what happens, even in New York. And so the children are speaking truth to power. I mean, I loved when Greta Thunberg said in Davos, our house is burning and all you care about is money. You know, it takes children to cut through all the prevarications and innuendo, you know, just direct. And they are very direct, and they are really very concerned now about our lack of responsibility as the adults in the world for what is happening, and in particular, mothers for what is happening. We don't have to be always serious about this. I discovered that, you know, we're bad at communicating the issue of climate change and the climate emergency, the climate crisis. So I was drawn into a podcast called Mothers of Invention with another much younger Irish woman who was 8 years old when I was elected president. And she's a successful comedian in New York. I'm sure maybe some of you listen to Mothers of Invention, hopefully. Anyway, our byline is that climate change is a man-made problem and requires a feminist solution. And Maeve would never bother explaining it, but I always feel that it's good to explain that man-made is generic, and that a feminist solution definitely includes men, and I know it includes all the men in the room here, but men have to be welcomed to be included, and definitely included in a feminist solution, because it's a solution based on equality. It's a solution based on the solidarity in the 2030 agenda and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals, leaving no one behind. It's the opposite of the kind of economic structures that we have in our world, the neoliberal economic capital structure that we have. So I think that it's really important. When I first started myself to become involved in climate, I felt I had to apologise for being rather late to the table, because when I served as President of Ireland for 7 years, from 1990 to 1997, and then as High Commissioner for Human Rights from 1997 to 2002, I never made a speech on climate, not one, because by the time I got to the UN, I had my own pretty broad area of responsibility, and there was another part of the UN that was dealing with climate change. So I was in a complete silo. It wasn't until I started working with a small NGO that I had founded called Realising Rights, working in African countries on the rights that matter so much if you don't have them. Rights to food, safe water, health, education, jobs, shelter. And I was also honorary president of Oxfam. And everywhere I went in Africa, women would say to me, or communities would say to me, largely women, we just don't know what's happening. Is God punishing us? Everything has changed. This is just outside our experience. And it was the long periods of drought and the flash flooding, it was the rainy seasons that didn't come or didn't come at the right time, etc., etc. And it was undermining food security in particular, and also the stresses of drought on the availability of water. And it was affecting women more than anyone. Now, unfortunately, as I think you know well, the news about climate change gets really worse by the day. I just want to quote a report on the 11th of May of this year. Scientists at the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii, which tracks atmospheric CO2 levels since the late 1950s, detected 415.26 parts per million. The last time Earth's atmosphere contained this much CO2 was more than 3 million years ago, when global sea level rise, sea levels were several meters higher. So there is a real urgency. Let's talk about climate change at this meeting. If we mention, let's say, either climate justice, where we want to go, or emergency, breakdown, crisis, then we know what we're up against and how much time we have. Let's go back to 2015, where we had the two frameworks that were negotiated, and I had my position as the special envoy of the UN Secretary General at the time on climate change. So I was paying a lot of attention. In September, 193 countries came together and agreed, after 2 years of messy negotiation, they finally agreed the 2030 Agenda and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and I still wear this badge, partly because it's the only badge the UN ever liked. Why was it possible to agree such a good package with lovely language about human rights and gender equality and leaving no one behind, even prioritizing the furthest behind first? Because it was voluntary, negotiated to be voluntary. Then we had the Paris Climate Agreement in December, and I was paying more attention to that because that was my particular job. And it was getting weaker and weaker as a treaty. You know, bits were falling off, as they say. And the only thing that really moved was the mantra in the street, 1.5 to stay alive, 1.5 to stay alive, that we had to have that in the text. So what happened, in fact, was we got a new goal articulated for the first time in the Paris Climate Agreement, that the world would have to stay well below 2 degrees Celsius of warming above pre-industrial standards and work for 1.5 degrees. Many people, including myself, thought at that time that the work for 1.5 degrees was a kind of sop to the small island states and the least developed countries who tried so hard to get that into the text. That's what we thought. But nobody had studied this. The scientists had not studied this. So they had to ask the scientists. And what the scientists said was very stark and very clear last October. They answered 2 questions, basically. What's the difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees? And if we have to stay at 1.5 degrees, what do we do? What steps do we take? And they answered unusually clearly for scientists. Scientists, sometimes it's the language of science. It's, you know, not always clear. This was very clear. What they said, and I am simplifying a bit, was there is a big difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees. In that time, bad things happen. The coral reefs will probably more or less completely disappear. The Arctic ice will probably disappear. And the permafrost, which is already melting, will melt much more severely and throw up not just carbon, but methane, which is far more serious than carbon. So the scientists collectively said the world as a whole must stay, if possible, at 1.5 degrees and not go above that. And any step above that, any tiny step above that, things get worse, seriously worse. And they said to us, you have 12 years. That was last October. We're now in September of the 11th year, and at the end of September of the 11th year. And they said, it is doable if we have the political will. And they said, what we need to do to get on track for a safe world is we have to reduce by 45% global carbon emissions by 2030. That's the 12 years. Last year, emissions went up. This year, emissions will probably go up, almost inevitably will go up. So we're not on track. There is greater awareness, there's greater sense, we've got the marches, we've got the thing, but we're not on track as yet to bend that curve. We need disruption. We need disruption of all kinds. We need litigation, a good disruption, if it works, and more cases are coming forward to try to do that. There was a case, actually, judgment given yesterday in a case in Ireland which failed, sadly. Anyway, they're going to appeal it, and hopefully we'll see. But, you know, there are cases all over the world. Shareholders questioning in corporations. Mark Carney in the Bank of England saying to investors, don't be too invested in what will become stranded assets, warning them. Extinction Rebellion, people prepared to go even to jail to disrupt things. We actually need a whole combination of things, but more than anything else, we need what is happening today. We need a climate justice movement. And it's really heartening to see women leaders stepping forward, more than I've ever seen. And this is a good example. I mean, literally, I do make the point that African women leaders have been talking about climate change for quite a long number of years because it's so real in their lives. Asian women the same. But I would go to meetings in Europe and here in the United States, even 2 years ago, even maybe a year and a half ago, and we would talk about Me Too, equal pay, violence against women, health, education, and then climate without quite knowing what we wanted to say about climate. That was literally the case. After this 1.5 degree report last October, warning us about the 12 years, talking about our children and grandchildren, suddenly women leaders have woken up. And it is very much part of this movement of the school children striking, of the young people making their voices heard, of the Extinction Rebellion, and of the increasing business and investment leadership, making commitments and calling for more ambition from governments. And the importance of this growing climate justice movement is that it will call for a just transition to a world powered by clean energy and climate actions that fully respect human rights. So workers in the coal, oil and gas sections won't be left out, and priority will be given to reaching the 1.1 billion people that still lack electricity and the 2.3 billion, mainly women, who cook with charcoal, coal, peat and animal dung. You know, it's extraordinary. We have all the gadgets. We have the mini systems. We have the clean cook stoves. We have the solar panels. We have it all. We just don't have the moonshot approach yet. That's what we need to say, within 5 years, we will reach, or at the latest 10 years, we will reach every person. And that would make a difference. So I'm going to end with what I usually say to audiences now, 3 steps that I think fit with the frameworks I was talking about earlier. And the 3 steps basically are, first of all, to make climate change personal in your own life. And the way you do that is you do something you weren't doing before. It's to do with the issue of your own, reducing your own consumption emissions. And maybe energy conservation, and maybe better recycling, maybe a change in your eating habits. I've become a pescatarian. I don't eat meat anymore. Still pine for lamb from the west of Ireland, but I don't cheat, gone. And having done this, the second step is to get angry and to get active. To get angry with those who have more responsibility and aren't doing enough. And that's governments right across the board. It's business, particularly the fossil fuel, but also agribusiness, transport, etc. And take action to support those who are doing the right thing in conservation, in bringing energy to those in energy poverty, and so on. And the third step, and I think this is the most important, is to imagine this world that we must be hurrying towards, because it will be a much healthier world. We won't have the choking and the stifling of fossil fuel pollution on air and on water. We will have a much more equal world, because to get there, we will have had to implement the Sustainable Development Goals with the solidarity of those goals, getting clean energy to developing countries to let them develop without emissions. So let me end by basically, on today, watching those television photos of millions of children coming out. I really want to thank those children. They have mainstreamed intergenerational injustice. It hits every family in the world in different ways, but every family is affected by the fact that young people are calling us out and saying, I had a lovely text this morning from my youngest grandchild. I'm a lucky Irish grandmother. I have 6 grandchildren. Manaz and I compare grandchildren quite often when we meet. Mine range from 15 to 2 years old. And I had a picture of a 2-year-old holding a placard that said, "Don't burn my future." Now that was written by somebody, but she had scribbled all over it. I thought to myself, that's what it's about. That, you know, if 2-year-olds are getting out and telling us, "Don't burn my future," that's a wake-up call, and that's really why we need a feminist forum and a feminist solution. Thank you.
Everybody, I feel like this convening is a bit of a reunion, because there are people around this table who I haven't seen maybe for a decade, and yet still in the trenches, still struggling to get us to a better place. Rani, thank you, and AUB for all that you do. And I was, first of all, to say thank you to Manaz, because WLP just does extraordinary work, and I think it's one of those organizations that manages to bring the global north together with the south, and wide representation from the south, tackling some of the toughest issues like family law reform, and giving us and giving them the primer for how to do this. And I think the learning partnerships have really devolved into so much good work. And I had a chuckle to myself when Mana said, well, I don't have to introduce Mary, but let me tell you how we got here. And that's been the sort of life of Mary Robinson, because she goes from place to place and inspires. Sometimes she cajoles, coerces. She does all kinds of things in the name of doing good. And I can speak to that because when I was ambassador, she made sure I went to Durban, even though my government was against it. And I had to struggle, and it wasn't enough then to say Mary Robinson said I should go. But it gradually changed their minds too when the American delegation said to me, well, why are you here? And when I explained to them, they said, oh, we should think about gender and climate. So, these relationships really do matter. But more recently, Mary has, I'm at Georgetown University now, and Mary has brought Trinity College in Ireland together with us to focus on gender, climate, and conflict. And the more I've come to know, the more I realize, looking at Sara here, the displacement that's already taking place, the massive numbers of women especially, because they're severely impacted, and children who are having to move because the land is no longer arable. They have no future, economic future. I was in Papua New Guinea, and a woman, they were from the islands, all the women, and the first one introduced herself. And she said, I'm from Kiribati, and we will be the first island to go completely underwater. And now when the sea level rises, they are half underwater. So that's the reality Mary, I think, really tries to help us understand that this is already real in some people's lives, even though we know it's real for us too. They are feeling it really on the front lines. And today we're really lucky because we've got so many extraordinary people around this table who are gonna tackle this issue in a way that gives us a perspective that we might not have, but really enable us to grasp the consequences and hopefully the solutions in a much deeper way. So I am going to start with Najat Ayun Saliba, and who was already introduced by the president of AUB. But she is a professor. She is an expert in her field. And I think today you're also going to tell us how you're working with local communities and what's happening on this issue in a holistic way. Not just the technical, which you know so well, but how are you engaging communities to address it? So it's all yours.
Thank you. Can I have the presentation? So I'm going to talk about the other end, the climate injustice. And I'm just going to cut down the introduction and get to the examples where we show how much climate change has affected our part of the world, especially that we are not producers of climate change, we are only on the receiving end. And that's extremely important to highlight. So climate change is here. We lead the way in finding solutions for and with the people at the AUB Nature Conservation Center. So I'm gonna present the challenges, skip over the approaches, and share with you examples for the sake of time. The most important thing is that 7 million people die every year from air pollution. Out of these 7 millions, 4 millions die from ambient air pollution, and 3 millions are children and the women who die from indoor air pollution. This is according to WHO. And globally, we have 2 billion people who use unsafe drinking water. And it's predicted that seawater intrusion is going to affect most of the coastal cities, especially in developing countries. What are the governments doing? Not much, especially in the developing world. We have overexploitation of water, all resources. We have very little data to share and to rely on. The funding agencies usually try to work with the government for a good reason, because they want to actually push for reforms, but this does not trickle down to people. So there is somehow the line is broken between the people and the rest of the world. And so this line from funding agencies to government to people is not working. We decided to take it totally the other way around. And so we go from people all the way to funding agencies. And I'm going to show you some successful examples today. So we work definitely with the community. We co-identify locally relevant challenges. We co-design interventions with them. And then we collect data and we make our center a go-to platform for data information and for reference. This is always iterative because things change. So nothing is static, it's all dynamic. So I'm going to skip over the process and go into the first example. The first program that we have is Test the Water. Water has become an important problem, a very, very acute problem in the Middle East. Lebanon used to be one of the richest countries in water in the past, especially in the Middle East, but now you can see rivers are very polluted. We have much less rain, and what I'm showing down here is the seawater intrusion into the aquifers and the underground water. And this is a major problem for crops and for tap water and others. So what we decided to do is to design citizen science projects whereby we develop low-cost monitors. We put them in the hands of the citizens. We make digital platforms to identify the problem, and then we recommend low-cost treatment. Example, one village in the south, they called us, they said they had a contaminated water. We put together a team of experts from AUB. We went and with our low-cost monitoring testing tool, we collected samples, tested the water with them, recorded the results, held workshops, established a framework of how best we can work together. And what we found is that the women were mostly furious. They were the ones who demanded from local municipalities solutions because they felt that not only that their lives were at risk, it's also the lives of their families and kids. So they really pushed hard to find solutions for their contaminated water. So in the workshop together, we discussed possible solutions. And just to tell you how easy sometimes the solutions could be when we work with the locals, is that we suggested for one of the public wells to have a chlorinated system. And they said, you know, by the way, we have a chlorinated system, but we don't know how to use it. All there was to it is just go and teach the local municipality how to use the chlorinated system. That was one of the solutions. Other solutions were to suggest new lines for their sewage effluents. And on the air pollution level, we definitely did an emission inventory of all the emission sources, put some scenarios to do air dispersion models, and we will validate this using low-cost monitors. We're doing a lot more work on air pollution, especially that we're trying to raise awareness among health professionals, because once the doctor starts asking about air pollution, then everybody would be more aware of it. We have a team of physicians with us on board, trying to understand what it takes to actually raise awareness among health physicians. We also did some assessment for molds and fungi in refugee settlements, and we learned that in Lebanon, 80% of the Syrian refugees do not live in tents, they live in poor settlements of concrete. And so we looked at their houses, tested the air for fungi and molds, and we found that 98% of households reported having at least one type of allergenic mold, and 73% reported having at least one type of toxigenic mold, which was really devastating. One of the problems that the Middle East and other more emerging cities are facing is that the national grid cannot supply enough electricity for their citizens. And so what's happening is that the citizens are subsidizing this shortage with diesel generators. And we took an area of 0.55 kilometers, and all these red dots that you see in this area are diesel generators. And we counted the density and we found that there is one diesel generator for every other building, which is huge. And this increases the levels of air pollution by 36% over and above the background emission that we have. So this is huge, it's a major problem, and we learned that it's not only in Lebanon, it's becoming a recurrent problem in Syria, in Iraq, and all these four emerging countries. Other than that, we definitely are facing a solid waste management problem, especially after closing one of the largest landfills. And you can see in red here the open dump sites that mushroomed all over the country. This is a devastating situation. So what we did, we developed the educational solid waste management models to spread in schools. We also have programs to teach municipalities on how to run recycling and reducing and reusing campaigns. We also have this multi-objective decision analysis tool that we put open access in the hands of decision makers to make the best decision in any given context. All our publications are, by the way, open access for to use by everybody. Another example is that next to the landfill that was closed, the community around it called us and they said, we need your help, we need to assess our health after being exposed to all the fumes and all the gases that were coming up. So we went there, we did the exposure assessment, we also worked with them on their local solid waste management problems. We shared the results with them in an open access way, and interviewed during this process 60 women to understand whether they are careful about and mindful about their waste generation. And we found that women are very, very mindful of good environmental practices, not necessarily because you want to label it under solid waste management, it's just because it's part of their culture. So this was an extremely important finding that it doesn't take awareness campaigns to teach them how to take care of, how to reduce, reuse, and take care of their solid waste management. Also, this is a program that we produce, that we handle in schools. We give out to schools, we have made up games and everything to just raise awareness about solid waste management. And finally, last but not least, we understand that we have a powerful mass of people in colleges that are able to help in innovative solutions. So we have the IBDA forum. It's a poster forum that engages students from the whole nation. So last year, for example, we had 352 students, 6 universities, and then 96 projects and so on. And because of this forum, we're thinking maybe this year, IBDA 2020 could be Women and Climate Change. We are inspired by this forum, and we're very excited, so we're going to try to engage more people. Thank you, and I leave you with some additional programs that we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. That was gave us a lot of food for thought. We're now going to turn to Bridget Burns, who's with WeDo, Women's Environment and Development Organization. She has been working at the nexus of gender equality and climate consequences for a good part of her young life. And, I really admire what you've done within the UN framework, trying to really ensure that the kinds of developments Mary talked about aren't static, but actually lead to something, lead to outcomes.
Talking, she does the work.
No, you do plenty of work too, Mary. But I was reminded seeing Bridget that when I was in my job at the State Department, we really wanted to get into addressing this issue, which was then already becoming a critical issue. And being engaged in the women's space, I try to reach out to women's organizations. And what I found to my dismay was, this was almost 10 years ago, so few were involved in this space. And WeDo was at the head of the table, and WeDo was really a great teacher And we struggled back then how to get to the point which is growing today, but we really need to get more women's organizations involved in this space. So Bridget, it's all yours to tell us how to get there.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really so pleased to be here. I'm sure that some of us, we were talking about, oh, we want to also be on the streets and in the spaces, but it's really important to be in spaces with people who are really concerned and desperate to start engaging or to continue engaging in this space and want to collaborate in new radical partnerships to combat this challenge. And so I think we should underscore this critical work that we're doing here as well. Since many have shared their journeys with Mary in particular, and she knows the story well because I tell her this all the time, but when I was 8 years old, I played the harp for Mary, because obviously I was in a Gaelic singing group, and I would just like to say that, seeing this incredible woman warrior leader was a huge inspiration for me, and so I made my whole path to try to follow her, and I didn't know that I'd ever end up sitting across the table with her, but I do pinch myself every time that it happens. I'm also really pleased that Mary brought Hindu along, because this is another one of my teachers in life. And so before I get into some of the work that we do, I wanted to just pass over, because a lot of our work is based on the premise that we won't solve this crisis unless particularly Indigenous women at the front lines are those whose voices are heard the most and most often on what the solutions are. So I wanted to ask Hindu to just say a few words about who she is and why Indigenous women's voices in the climate debate is so critical. I did ask her first.
Thank you so much, Bridget. I'm so honored to be here, even as Mary said, just to meet at this street. But I think we meet at the right time and the right place, and then I'm so happy to have you here, Bridget. And then always realizing that giving the voice to those who are in the front line of climate change. So I am coming from Chad. I'm an indigenous Bororo woman, coming from a pastoral communities who have their life on always dealing with the climate impact, and then where women are the first one who are innovating, who are fighting, and who are creating solutions with nothing, because they have only the traditional knowledge. I'm coming from the community who still do not have electricity, still do not have school, still do not have hospital, still do not have access to the clean water, and still do not have supermarket, because only the Bruges is our supermarket, and all the plants and air who are our pharmacy. So women are the ones who are keeping it and who are saving it. So for us, they are an actor for the climate justice, and we need to make justice for them. So I'm so happy that we have a widow from the Beirut, my friend here, so it's really helping Indigenous women to give voices to those who are taking the decisions, and Mary who are pushing them and putting us in front to get all the agreements, and we are doing it at the ground to implement it. So thank you very much.
And I'm sure you'll see him do in many of the important spaces over this coming weekend, because she continues to be an incredibly powerful voice for women and Indigenous peoples around the world. I think it's wonderful, or it's a good sign to me, that Mary started with the IPCC report, because my commitment that I made was to not go to any meeting this year without starting with the IPCC report, and that stark reminder of what it said. That the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees is the difference between having an ice-free North Pole every 100 years versus every 10 years. And it's the difference between the deaths of millions of people. And I try, I think we spend a lot of time around the table trying to understand how to communicate climate change. And Communications 101 is that fear doesn't work. So it's not to put fear in the eyes of everyone that we can't combat this, but there is a need to ground our work in reality, because we can certainly find a lot of hope, and I think that everyone I advocate will find the most hope is within the feminist movement, and what the feminist movement has to lend in terms of ideas and understanding and analysis to what system change actually looks like, and why the work towards promoting equality is what will help us achieve and combat climate change. but that commitment to understanding the reality and recognizing the reality and recognizing, as Mary started with, that this is not just tackling climate change, it's about climate justice, because there's a really, really deep injustice that's happening currently and that's going to continue to be exacerbated. In the work that we've been doing over the last decades or so, I'm sure some of you will have known my spirit guide, Bella Abzug, and Wangari Maathai, among many others who have been kind of beating the drum for a long time, that when sitting in spaces where people were talking about environment and sustainable development issues, that feminist and women's rights perspectives were not being included, and that critically women were not sitting at the table putting forward these issues. And so I think that we've always tried to take a multiple prong approach, because as feminists we know we have to work at every level, understanding and mapping where power is and fighting all these multiple oppressions at once. And so we do a lot of work to try to change, when we're sitting at the table, what that table looks like and what's being offered to us. And that's the work that we've done within the UNFCCC. That's the work that Hindu's been doing, where now you have your first Indigenous Peoples platform, a platform for Indigenous peoples and local communities, which has Indigenous peoples actually sitting at the table and trying to put forward the critical importance of Indigenous and traditional knowledge. It's why you have things like a gender action plan, because of the work of people like Mary and women's organizations from around the world. And we've been similarly having had a focus for the last few years on climate finance. And we have a new report that we just put out on lessons for engagement pathways for women's organizations and women's funds to be able to access climate finance. And a lot of that is very policy wonky, direct advocacy, trying to get gender action plans from projects, trying to make sure that women are represented in those spaces. But it's really about a narrative of changing what people consider climate solutions. And it goes very much to the local solutions that you were showcasing. At the end of the day, at climate summits like we're seeing happening, and we have a program called Gender Just Climate Solutions, and it comes out of the 2014 Climate Summit, where our colleagues had put forward solutions of women's cooperatives who were leading on small-scale energy cooperatives that were actually small-scale, over 50,000 beneficiaries. And that had the real power to be replicated, that were rooted in multiple different forms of trying to promote gender equality, racial equality, access to resources, control over energy solutions. And we applied for this action to be showcased, and we were told quite blankly this was too small and too insignificant to be included as a climate solution. And even now with this current climate summit, we're pushing for strong outcomes from it, but social and political drivers were very much an afterthought. And there took a lot of fight of people to say, this is critical. You cannot, I think we sometimes think we've moved beyond the technocratic speak of what climate change is, that we can have a technical fix where we fix the emissions and somehow it's okay, that it's somehow not linked to the fact that we still have over $700 billion in investments in fossil fuels, that it's somehow not linked to the $1.8 trillion military budget, that we can find these resources without shifting from business as usual in any way. In some spaces we have moved beyond that, but there's still a really strong hold of this technical fix for climate change. And I think that is where feminist movements and feminist analysis, in both ways, both the experience that Indigenous and grassroots communities have, and we heard this quite clearly at a summit I was just at over the last 2 days, put on by Amnesty and Greenpeace and others, which was a People's Summit on Climate Rights and Human Survival. And there we were really talking about how do we bring this human rights agenda into this understanding of what's going to challenge climate change and how that needs to be central to the solutions. And so I think that we're at a potential nexus where we can shift over, but it is going to take those who have always struggled against oppression, who have always struggled against these multiple forms, who understand what it's like to fight for the survival of your community, of your peoples, and come through at the other end to educate us on what we need to really combat this current crisis. And it's going to take feminist analysis and understanding of, care economy, of revaluing what we currently value, of what counts and what doesn't, in order to educate and to help those who are coming from, frankly, a deeply neoliberal, capitalist, patriarchal, white supremacist model that underpins the current crisis that we're in. So my kind of ending, I really liked the three pieces that Mary left everyone with, the kind of personal reflection, the activism, and getting angry, because it really is about engaged citizenship. We cannot combat this with one solution alone. And I really am looking for and looking for more feminist leadership on climate justice. Because I do think that if we pool our knowledge together and our analysis of the crises that have really pinned down women around the world and caused gender inequality, we realize we already have the analysis of the climate crisis as well. And we just need to be demanding that our voices and our leadership deserve to be equally represented in the climate space as well. So I'll leave it
Terrific, you've given us a lot to think about and a lot to determine what we're gonna do about them. So now we're gonna turn to Shireen Tadros, who runs Amnesty's, and Bridget mentioned Amnesty's New York office and your work at the UN for Amnesty. But she has been an acclaimed journalist, and sometimes I think that profession does help focus and underscore what are the key issues. And you're gonna focus on the vulnerable populations and how they're impacted and what we need to do.
Thank you so much, and thank you. It's such an honor to be here amongst all of you. I feel like I've been inspired several times today already, and someone who, like me, works at the UN every day, that really doesn't happen. So, and really not just in this room, but on my way here, as I, left the subway in Brooklyn and found all of these kids outside starting to gather, to when I went to the Amnesty International office, and we had put out a sort of open invitation for people to come and help us with our slogans and our banners, and hundreds of people just turned up to help us do that. I, as you said, was a journalist before, and I covered the Arab uprising, the spring, if you like, in Egypt and in Libya, Yemen, and so on. And for the first time since I left journalism, I really felt a ping of that today. And watching these young people on the streets and all this sort of just passion, it was like an awakening. Let's hope it doesn't have the same fate as the Arab Spring, but so far so good. It's that sort of harnessing, and how do we harness as well all of that energy and make sure it goes beyond today is a big question. But I wanted to start actually by quoting Philip Alston and a report that you all, I'm sure, know very well. He's the Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights. And it's a sobering quote, I warn you, but I think it's important. He said, most human rights bodies have barely begun to grapple with what climate change, sorry Mary, his term, not mine, portends for human rights, and it remains one on a long list of laundry list of issues despite the extraordinarily short time to avoid catastrophic consequences. At Amnesty International, we agree with him. And I'm certainly not here to sell you on how the NGO and human rights community have found solutions. Rather, to admit to you that we are dangerously slow to the table on this. We must do better because the planet is at stake. But the good news is, as Greta said earlier this week, activism actually works. So what can we do? In the past 2 days, as Bridget was alluding to, Amnesty International, together with Greenpeace and other organizations, held the first ever People's Climate Summit here in New York. And the idea was to bring individuals and groups affected by climate together and come up with actual deliverables, actual initiatives that can, help, ease the situation. And what was interesting is that some groups that had been directly affected by the climate crisis hadn't actually invested in climate research. They hadn't even made that connection necessarily with the degradation of their rights and climate. And one of the things that we really can all help to do, but certainly Amnesty is trying, is to build the capacity of local organizations to make those links between the climate crisis and human rights. We then took those, what we call the declaration, the People's Declaration, which everyone came up with, sort of a list of what everyone can be doing, should be doing, what states should be doing more of. And we delivered that on Wednesday evening, right to the hand of the UN Secretary General, Mr. Guterres. We sort of sat there as he flipped through the declaration and made sure that he gave it to his staff. So it's some attempt to start to link the two summits and bring voices that really match and that are affected to the fore. The other question that we grapple with at Amnesty, and we have been doing a lot of thinking around, is whether protecting rights actually helps fight against climate degradation. We believe the answer is absolutely yes. And one clear example of this is in the case of indigenous rights. There's often a close relationship and even an interdependence between indigenous peoples and their immediate environment. And respect for indigenous land rights has a protective effect against deforestation, for example. So we began earlier this year work on indigenous rights in Brazil's Amazon. And we did so because there was a clear uptick in violations of indigenous rights under the president. So that ranged from the very stark threats, death threats against indigenous leaders and land seizures, but also in the context where indigenous people depend on the forests for food, for their livelihoods, even in a spiritual sense, a sense of identity with their environment around them. In Brazil, indigenous people go out and patrol their own lands from land grabbers because government authorities are patrolling less and less. So one clear role that organizations like Amnesty is to try and shift the narrative away from the immediate focus, and in this case for Brazil it was the fires, and actually try and look at it in a broader way, about enforcing laws, about protecting people's rights, about investigating and prosecuting those responsible, and so on. So make no mistake, the task ahead of all of us is absolutely huge. The climate crisis effects today are a poor guide to what is at stake. So our research has to really go beyond what is happening here and now. And we have to do this immediately because the window of opportunity to reduce emissions within a margin that is even relatively safe is only open for the next few years. There is right now, I would say, rhetorical acceptance that the rights of people most vulnerable to the effects of climate change are being impacted, but a lot more has to be done to highlight the urgency and really make sure that nobody can continue to ignore this problem. So with that, I will say thank you, and I'm very sorry that I have to run so that I can join one of the climate marches.
Thanks so much, and I'm sure you will continue to inspire them. We're going to turn now to Sara Costa, who is the Executive Director of the Women's Refugee Commission, and the pressures on the kind of work that Sara does with the rising numbers of refugees today, particularly women and children and young people who are displaced and undergoing unimaginable horrors in many ways. And as I said at the outset, this is an issue that will only grow numbers of displaced people and drive them just as conflict and other issues are affecting them today. Climate will be an issue and is already an issue affecting them. So Sara,
thank you, Milan.
Focus on this whole issue area.
Okay, well, thank you, Milan, and thank you, Raz, for inviting me to speak here today. I am angry. I'm very angry. I'm angry for all sorts of reasons, but one of them is Brazil, because as a Brazilian, I'm seeing my forests being burnt down, so that makes me very, very angry. But I'm also angry because I've just come back from the southern border, where a man-made humanitarian crisis is taking place, and it's really hurting people. But I'm also angry because I don't think the field that I work in, and my remarks are being shaped by working in the humanitarian field, we've quite got to the point where we're stepping up as much as we should be stepping up. So I apologize that I'm going to refer to my notes and not speak without notes, because I've also got a board meeting and some other things are sort of circulating in my head. But I will try to be as entertaining as possible reading notes. So climate-related displacement and migration is really one of the biggest challenges of our time. And the International Organization for Migration estimates that there will be as many as 200 million environmental migrants by the year 2050. Other estimates put this number much, much higher. Whether it's wildfires in California, rising sea levels in Bangladesh, or extended periods of extreme heat in Guatemala, climate change, I'm sorry for the expression, climate change affects us all. But this is coming at a time when we are already experiencing the highest levels of displacement on record, with an unprecedented 70 million people around the world forced from their homes by violence, persecution, and human rights violations. The majority, as we know, are women and children. Many are going to be displaced for decades, and largely in developing regions. And as was pointed out earlier, over 80%, say, of Syrians are not in camps, therefore are much harder to reach with services and protection. There is a growing understanding in the humanitarian community that climate change, in addition to being a driver of displacement, can both contribute to conflicts that cause displacement and exacerbate existing displacement situations we've just heard. While there is no legal definition of what makes a climate refugee, it is undeniable that we are seeing increasing numbers of people on the move due to climate crisis. However, the lack of formal recognition or protection under international law is not an excuse to give short shrift in humanitarian response to climate change. And I underscore that because there's a lot of discussion around what is the term we should use, whatever. It detracts from what we actually need to do. For the Women's Refugee Commission, then, it's not about numbers or legal frameworks. It's about meeting the needs of all displaced individuals, ensuring their rights and protection, and advancing holistic, gender-responsive, and resilience-based approaches. And I underscore this, and I'll come back to it. As we've heard, climate change is not gender neutral. Women and girls are disproportionately impacted, particularly women living in poverty or those who are marginalized because of age, social status, race, ethnicity, and disability, and other factors. And I underscore again disability because we tend, when we're talking among ourselves, to forget the impact that climate crisis has on people with disabilities. As with conflict, climate change exacerbates existing gender inequalities and discrimination, which makes women and girls more vulnerable to its effects. For example, during drought, women must often travel further to collect water, which puts them at risk of sexual assault. Women who haven't learned to read will be less likely to access information in an emergency, and women are more likely to die in a disaster because in so many societies, they don't gain life-saving skills such as learning to swim. Over and over, displaced women and girls, whatever the push factors, remain disadvantaged in humanitarian relief and recovery efforts. And while we've seen some encouraging policy developments, and I can refer back to the World Humanitarian Summit, the Global Compacts for Refugees and Migration, that do reflect some of the much needed shift in working practices. The fact is that humanitarian responses still come up short in addressing displaced women's and girls' needs. And this results in egregious human rights abuses and squanders the enormous potential that refugee women can bring to achieving solutions. In core areas such as food security, prevention of gender-based violence, and peace building, just to name a few. So what does this actually mean? It means that the traditional short-term reactive humanitarian relief model, which has a lot of the components that Bridget referred to earlier, is no longer effective or appropriate in really addressing the challenges that we are facing. It means that business as usual is no longer an option. And there is a pressing need to rethink how humanitarian aid is delivered so that it can do a better job at addressing crises caused by climate, but also in general, as I said, women's and girls' needs. We desperately need, new creative ideas and approaches. And I think discussions like we're having today are absolutely fundamental. Humanitarians talk to humanitarians, development people talk to development people. So bringing us all together to really think about these new approaches, I think is essential. And we really need to make sure that gender equality and resilience-based approaches are front and center of humanitarian response if we're to really improve the protection outcomes for women and girls and give them a chance, a real chance to adapt and recover. And I just want to share just a couple of ideas, and it really overlaps a lot with what's already been said for obvious reasons, because this is the direction we need to go in, right? But first, we need to stop treating crises, including climate-related crises, as a short-term problem, and support innovative programs that can transform long-term displacement into an opportunity that benefits refugees and host communities alike. We must make investments in preparedness that are sustainable long after humanitarian actors have moved on to the next crisis. Second, we need a fundamental shift in thinking to adapt to the changing needs on the ground and design solutions that support refugee women, whatever the cause of displacement, support refugee women to rebuild their lives and move beyond assistance. We must recognize that refugees are not just vulnerable people in need. They are resilient survivors coping and adapting to the profound changes and traumatic events that have upended their lives. They have strengths, skills, and capacities that should be supported. Third, we need to do much more and make sure that refugee women are part of decision-making affecting their communities, and that leadership, women's leadership on climate change, is recognized. And these are the bits that have been mentioned before. We are already seeing women and girls leading climate change and being strong activists in this field, and including my daughters who are downtown. And we really need to understand the role that women play as first responders. And one critical piece in order to do and really elevate women as leaders in this field is to make sure that the resources actually get to them. There's so much talk about localization, but when you look where the money's going to, it's going to very large organizations and still not to the groups on the ground. And if you look at the average budget for some of these critical groups on the ground, it's still well under $50,000 a year. Importantly, we need to hold our leaders accountable to include women refugees in negotiation on climate justice and the global allocation of resources. Only when women and girls participate at national and community levels can they help devise effective climate solutions that build stronger and more resilient communities. At the Women's Refugee Commission, we know that if you get it right for women and girls in humanitarian action, you get it right for everyone. If we invest in women and girls and women's rights organizations, we invest in resilient communities. And finally, we must make sure that decision makers understand how climate change impacts women and girls differently from men and boys. Developing gender-sensitive strategies and responses is just not a luxury anymore. It's a matter of life and death. And let me close by saying that we have momentum, as Mary Robinson pointed out. We actually have momentum, and we have a chance to do things differently at the moment and stand united for climate justice. Climate change is a threat to us all. This is the chance to bring policymakers from the humanitarian and the development fields together and to take an intersectional approach as we tell leaders, who are the leaders coming to the UN next week, that climate justice is gender justice and gender justice is climate justice. One simply doesn't exist without the other. Thank you.
Very relevant. Thank you so much, Sarah. And we have one more speaker, a very distinguished speaker, before we move to our commentators, and that is Gay McDougall. Gay is a preeminent expert in international human rights law. I know when I was in the Clinton administration, she was one of the favored folks who was always rising to the occasion when it came to international racial discrimination issues. First UN independent expert on minority rights, engaged in the UN Commission on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. So Gay has been there always, and your global rights organization that you spent so much time, so many years heading up, really worked in a remarkable way with other justice advocates around the world. So now let's go to this issue, and how does all that Gay did relate to this?
Well, thank you very much. But I think that the lesson around the table is that everything that Gay McDougall has done relates to this issue. And I want to say thank you to Mary because, you know, we fought some battles together along the way. Sarah, we have. I mean, many people around this table, we may not have always called it correctly, climate justice. But we were working with the people who are often on the cutting edge of understanding what climate justice is about. Among the many other things here, I also am the head of the minority rights group that works on minority and indigenous rights issues around the world. Again, on the floor, on the ground, working with these communities continuously. And I would say that certainly, as usual, Mary has hit all the right notes in her keynote, because I usually start by saying, you know, for many of us, climate change conjures up, you know, a terrible future, where we and our form of life has been changed irreversibly if we do not take the right steps now. But for many other people, it's not about the future. It's about today, and about yesterday, and about last year. Because we're talking about minorities and indigenous peoples who are on the front lines of environmental collapse around the world. They're actually living in Alaska, where there were wildfires across Alaska. Is beyond what I could imagine. They are people who have been living in the Amazon, now on fire. Are dealing with the rising sea levels in the Pacific, the droughts in the Sahel, and the dwindling coral reefs in Australia. So we're talking about people who know this very well and are dealing with absolute panic area. And, these are also people who are usually, marginalized. They don't have a voice. I'm happy that we are now very much noticing and appreciative of the situation they're in, but they generally don't have a voice. They have no representation in any of the forums that we are normally in, whether it be government, international, NGOs, whatever. They're unable to plead their case themselves. The other thing, though, is that these are people who also have solutions, as has been laid out already. And they're very simple solutions that come out of their daily notice of what works and what doesn't work. But generally, nobody asks them. And generally, development agencies come in with their own solutions. So they are in really a catch-22 situation. But here's the thing, I think that my message is that, in addition to all we've talked about so far, that in the center of our efforts has to be human rights, and it has to be an understanding of marginalization and discrimination. Discrimination based on race, ethnicity, indigenous status, sometimes religious status, but we don't normally have to really grapple with how discrimination works. Who is at the back of the line when humanitarian assistance is passed out? And it's always so. And we have to begin to take that on. Why is it that refugee status is not recognized as, a grounds for refugee assistance in most places? We have to take that on. But the discussion overlooks the dimension of discrimination. These are people who've been pushed around for generations. The reason why they're in the position they're in now, on the edges of all civilizations, is that they've already been pushed out there. They've had their land stolen again. And no one sees that as an issue. But this next time that they're pushed, they're going to be pushed off. And their responses are going to be what we have to look at very carefully. And as they are pushed off, they take with them the knowledge of how to shepherd, as they have been. Wait a minute, what is it? It's the other way. How to be good stewards. How to be good stewards of our forests, of our seacoasts, as they have all over the world. But we are watching them being put out of the forest so that there can be conservation of wildlife with no attention to their needs. So we have to grapple with the fact that our salvation is tied to their salvation, that their marginalization is something that we have not dealt with, and that we're going to have to deal with not only the technological advances, the convincing of business interests of what they should and should not do, but we are going to have to fix the social, economic realities, racial realities of this world that we have been overlooking. That's going to be a major handful, in addition to the technical and scientific issues. But you can't do that without putting them in the center of this table, in the center of this room, and in the center of, I spent a year and a half, nicely funded by the Ford Foundation, sitting through the negotiations on the SDGs. And my mission, since I was the Special Rapporteur of Minorities, was to get 3 words in the SDGs: minorities and indigenous peoples. And I challenge you to run a scan and see how few times those are mentioned, because here was the leadership of the world. Yes, the SDGs, very important, but they thought that these people were irrelevant to meeting those goals. We've got to undo that kind of thinking. So the barriers that we face are not only the steadily accumulating crises that threaten us all, but also, first of all, to deal with the mess in our societies and that we have tolerated so far, the hierarchies and all of that. I thought I would just, this is from a publication that the organization that I chair has just put out on indigenous peoples, minorities and indigenous peoples and climate change. We've got the statistics that, would scare us all, but these statistics are tied to the lives of indigenous and minority peoples who are really on the front lines of climate disaster right now. So I just offered them up here in simple fashion. And I will say to you that I'm going to, this report I think is an excellent report. It's just coming out now in time for us. And it includes thematic chapters, each one with case studies. And it includes chapters on each region of the world with case studies from those regions. And I'm going to send it to everyone here by email, no paper. So just to say, we've got to lay the foundations for a fairer world if we're going to be climate change. Thank you.
Thanks, Gay, and we have, I think, a lot to think about, a lot to unpack, and we'll begin with some observations from our commentators. Avina Lucia is currently the Ghanaian ambassador Ghana's ambassador to Brazil, but she has a long distinguished history as a thought leader on gender issues and certainly African women's development. So take it away.
Thank you. Bryant, you can, yeah. I wish I was feeling long and distinguished right now. What I'm feeling is completely humbled. I have a lot of thoughts. They're scattershot because things have been coming to me as people speak. I started off with a couple of questions that have been partially addressed and that I realize are also partially assumptions that we work with. And as a teacher, I always say the most difficult thing to change is the assumptions that we work with. And maybe not in this room, but in a sense there's a kind of intractability that must shift. And especially amongst friends and allies who believe themselves to be already on board. And I would include myself in that. And some of the observations I'm making, I'll be honest, I'm making because of the radical shift in my own life in the last 2 years, about realizing the privilege of being an ambassador, realizing how much I have to learn, and also, therefore, realizing, though, the different layers of work we have to do, and how, in a sense, how difficult it is when, I wasn't expecting to say this, but you know, one of the daily reading guides I have is a book called My Utmost for His Highest. I'm a Christian. I never understood the until I started reading through Oswald Chambers' little comments. And the point of the title is that we are so often, the thing that defeats the utmost best is not the opposite worst, but the good that we don't realize is not good enough. And that's, I think, very often the challenge. How do you know that the good you're doing is not good enough when it is so much better than the thing you're trying to change? I can tell you, for instance, why that question came to me right now in this room. And that is, as Ghana's ambassador, you know, one of the things I'm trying to grapple with, especially being in Brazil, Brazil has changed itself wondrously in this particular regard to be one of the world's leaders in agriculture. You know, one of the problems for an ambassador is, you know, Brazil does actually not need the rest of the world in certain things. They don't need us because, you know, everything grows there. They've learned how to grow it and spread it around, and that doesn't mean they're getting it right, but in that respect they've done it. So here I am, as representing a country that is trying to deal with its food security for its own people. One of the things we're doing right now is working with the African Development Bank on greening the savannah. And Brazil is in an amazing situation to help us with that. So I'm really happy and pleased and thinking, I'm going to get this done. And then you sit in a room like this and you think, okay, this is good. We are greening the savannah and we need to. It is one of the points of vulnerability. But how do I monitor, that is the word, the way we are doing that? What really is the truth about soybeans? Who are the Brazilian companies that we're going to use to implement this program? And we will be so happy to enter the soybean market, but really, how do I monitor those kinds of decisions in the light of what Ghana needs? How do you know what's the short and the long-term solution? And how do you do that in a context when you are trying to, you know, compete with the company from Kuwait? You know, I mean, it's just like all of these things that come to you at once. And one of my questions always, like, we are so excited about what's going on today. One of the reasons we know what's going on is because we are connected around the world. We're all on WhatsApps and Instagrams and everything else. And that gives us power. But what does it cost? What is the price of that technological possibility? What is being mined? What are the impacts of the climate issues and the environmental degradation issues that are being raised in order to create our smartphones? Every time you pick up a smartphone, do you think about what did it cost to get the minerals in this phone so that I can have a global, climate justice day? I think about it only because I happened to visit the Ghanaian writer Aikwe Ama years ago, and he was living by the beach in Poppingine, and I noticed the sands were black. And I said, "What is this?" And he said, "Oh, the byproduct of the computer. Don't you know this is what's left when we mine cubic zirconas? And zirconas, the jewelry is the side effect. We need this to create our computers." And I'm standing on a black beach in Poppingine, and I'm thinking, oh, really? So those are my questions. How do we make the choice? And this isn't an answer, but I was talking yesterday about something that's excited me. I have two friends who are, they're writers. And one of the things that they were frustrated about was that African poets were not getting published because no publisher can afford to publish a book this thin. So they started a project, the box set series, where they ran a competition every year funded by a foundation where they get 8 to 12 chapbooks and put them in a box because a box set is commercially viable. So I thought of that. I don't know how it's going to fix your solution, but your small-scale solutions that other people are ignoring. Could you make a box set of small-scale solutions so that people will pay attention to, because it certainly worked for the poetry series. And the last thing I want to say, other than, I guess I have two more things to say. Mary Robinson, like everybody in the room, I need to thank you for the wake-up call. Because I'll be perfectly, I grew up in England, right? So I noticed when you became president of Ireland. It was really important. And then you moved to the UN on human rights. That was part of the course. Somebody coming from Ireland moved to human rights, that makes sense. And then you took on the climate, and I thought, oh. What's it? It's Mary Robinson, there must be a connection, it must be important. And really, that's what I thought, and that was my wake-up call. Because I am one of those people who had never even troubled to think about the solution. A couple of things happened at that time. I also did, actually, when we were Boko Haram. It was the Boko Haram issue that made me look at the map of where this was going on and was completely terrified that I could not find Lake Chad.
Yeah.
When I was at school, Lake Chad was one of the big lake wonders of the world, and that's not that long ago. It is not there. And that is so frightening. I did not know that could happen to a body of water like that. So my last thing that hopefully will help, and I'm so sorry, the reason I got up to talk to get Shireen's card, one of the things that has been really inspiring to me, being on the South American continent, I'm also ambassador to Colombia. And I was asked to speak last year at a conference on ethno-education. And that's where I discovered that Colombia has a law called Law 70.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Yes,
you know
yes,
about it. It's
yes.
unbelievable. It is the only time I have seen people of African descent classified as indigenous people outside the continent of Africa. That's one. But the thing about that law, it's about education, but it begins with a definition of indigenous people and their land rights. It marks out in Colombia what their property rights are, and then goes on to talk about indigenous ideas about the land and its protection, and therefore mandates the kind of education not only them, but the rest of the country need to implement. Now they're having difficulty implementing, like all good things, but I was so stunned that it actually exists. And it's a kind of model about, in terms of policy making, that very clearly states there is a relationship between how we call ourselves, where we live, how we define our philosophy of land, and how we therefore move on in a new world where we are trying to create a more just society. It has been inspirational. Those are my thoughts on this.
Thank you so much. And now we're going to move to Asma Khader. It's hard to keep track of Asma's career because sometimes she's starting NGOs, founding new organizations, on the cutting edge of all kinds of human rights progress in Jordan. And then she's in government, minister several times over parliamentarian. And you've done that time and again. Move out, move in, and try so hard to implement these issues. So from your Jordan perch and from your role with WLP, your observations.
Thank you so much. I don't know what to say, but I'm thinking what we should do. Because after all what we listen to, I do believe that moving to action is the thing that is still missed. Of course, all the academic and international efforts is very important, but without taking the issue to the daily life of women specifically on the ground in all the different areas of our states, making the very international and global local, and also the local issues, take it up to the international level, our work will not have any meaning. And I think what is missed is the political will. And everybody, the facts about what's going on and the risks and the dangers of the climate change and the injustice, climate issues and environmental issues is very clear. The issue is that who is working to put an end to this injustice and how we can make it a real global movement that can impact the public policies, the legislations, the actions, the programs, and the mentality of the public. Because still, when you talk about environment, people feel that, well, we do have many other priorities. They don't see the relation between their daily life and actions and decisions made for them and the climate change. So what we need to do from my side and from WLP partnership is how we can use this knowledge and this information and this passion toward the issue and make it a reality in the daily struggle of women in the rural areas, in the Bedouin areas, in the refugee camps, in all over the country, so we can have a real movement that have impact on policies and legislation. The issue is that there are powers in the world who don't believe in these needs, and they don't want it to happen. They just running for the very short-term benefits that they are running after. And it is not easy, it is everything. This struggle is everything struggle. It is human rights struggle, it is sustainable development struggle, it is democratic reform struggle, it is everything. And it is the people's interest and rights to take their rights in their hand and try to change and shape the world the way they want it to be. It's not easy, and it is not just because of the goodwill that we have, it will happen. I do believe that we need a lot of work and a lot of maybe extensive kind of activities and programs for example, I found very little resources in Arabic around these issues. Of course, there are some, but very minimal. So localization is not only financial topic, it is also language, and it is activism, and it is all other things. So I do believe that we need to focus on these issues as well, and to push for the look, when gender-based violence became a topic 3 decades ago, every individual civil society organization and women organization have it on their agenda. We want this issue to be on the top of every organization, civil society, of course, governmental and private sector and others' agenda. But for us, I think the academia and the civil society activists have to put it on the top of the agenda, because it has the impact on all and every other aspects. We are in every country working to implement the Sustainable Development Goals, Goal 5, and the other goals related to environment. But where is the link between the very risky situation that we have and our actions? And to be frank, we are still using the plastic things here and everywhere while talking about the issues. So how to make our our habits, our way of living, shift to a different type of it. It's our decision, our political will, that is not really seriously and strongly there. Maybe the children have a better belief in these issues than us, but we need to move. And if we want to move, we need to start by ourselves, and we need to start by making it a topic in the life of everybody, so they can be part of this wonderful alliance, and they can join Mary Robinson and WLP and all AUB and others in this struggle to see a real results, because the issue is how we can change the situation, and change cannot happen just because we think it should happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Asma, and thank you for coming down also to individual responses, just as Mary reminded us in terms of her points as well. We're going to turn now to Barbara Phillips, human rights activist, also a WLP board member, a thought leader on so many issues. I remember so well when you were heading up the gender agenda at the Ford Foundation in the Peace and Social Justice program area, and really saw the need to act on many of the issues we've all been involved in. So you've just been a real leader in this space, and I'm sure you have some cogent thoughts for us.
Well, it's very hard to follow my sisters who've had such impactful comments to make. But not to be a Debbie Downer, but just to state what I know all of us sitting around the table know, is that we are up against extreme anti-democratic global forces. Mm-hmm. Here in the United States, we have people leading our government who talk about the climate and the changes that are in front of us, happening now, as a matter of belief. You know, do you believe in climate change? As if we're talking about the Tooth Fairy or Santa Claus or Tinkerbell and Peter Pan. It's, do you believe in it? Making it very, very difficult to have an informed public engaged in this conversation. I think the young people today are showing us what a movement looks like, And so many more of us need to join this movement, and it indeed has to be a movement. Our work cannot be busy work. It can't be the work that we do that allows us to say, I'm so smart and I work so hard. I really appreciate the conversation about connecting our work to people on the ground, that our work is for and with those people who need solutions and who are with us, with academics, with science, creating solutions. If we don't do that, we end up with these theories of change that inform work that is in fact busy work. We need our theories of change to be informed by the practice on the ground. We need the academic research and knowledge to understand the people that we're working for and with. And then we need to be open to reflecting and learning from that practice, which is based upon that theory of change, so that we know when we need to make changes in both our theory and our practice. Otherwise, we're doing busy work. And we hardly have any resources to begin with. And we can't afford to waste any of them on busy work. I love the idea that Abina has challenged us with, which is to consider when is good not good enough. Even as we are trying to change something that we know is terrible, and we want to get to a place that's better than what we have. But when do we really look at what we're doing and say to ourselves, as smart as we are and as hard as we're working, that's not, what we're doing isn't good enough. So, I'm inspired by the conversation today. I think those of you who are working on the ground in this field with people who are creating solutions for their own worlds, you give us hope that this movement can actually change the lives of people. And I would tweak the 3 steps, Mary, that you gave to us, because I'm a daughter of the South here in the U.S. I was raised under legal segregation. And when I think about how people changed that world, they first imagined the world they wanted to live in. When I think about Fannie Lou Hamer, who lived on a plantation in Mississippi, and I knew her toward the end of her life, and I still don't know the answer to how is it that isolated in the middle of nothing but cotton fields and white supremacy, she got it into her head that she could make a different world. Not that there should just be a different world, but she thought she could help make that. And so I think we start with that imagination, and then we get angry and take action. And we take action supporting those who are doing the right thing, but we also call out what's wrong and who's wrong. And then we make it, and then that action, we make personal. And so that's what I saw people doing in a civil rights movement. I think that's what I see the kids doing. I think they're imagining a world different than what they're being handed. So it's a good day to be here, and I think this conversation helps move this work and shape it in a direction that will give us the world we want to live in.
Now, when you were talking, I was thinking of a quote that I'm always inspired by, and it really matches what you said, and it was what Bobby Kennedy always used to quote in some of the worst of times. And he borrowed, obviously, from someone else, but he said, "Some people see things as they are and say why. Others see them as it could be, imagining, dreaming, and say why not." So we have to be the why not people, right? But thank you for that. And our last commentary is from Erin Williams. Erin is with the Global Fund for Women, which I think everybody here is familiar with. And your fund, the fund really does work with women on the ground. And the hard work that they're doing and the support that we all try to give them. But tell us about that and what you're doing in this area.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here. I came into the room not knowing many people, but now I feel like I have a lot of new friends. And not allies, but co-conspirators and accomplices, because that's what it's about. It's not about allyship. It's about doing the work together. So my name is Erin Williams, and I also have notes too, Sarah. So I'm the program director for sexual and reproductive health and rights at the Global Fund for Women, and under that portfolio, we work on resistance to the Golden Gag Rule, abortion rights and access, and advancing LGBTQI and sex worker rights. And we are very excited to be continuing the intersectional work around sexual and reproductive justice and climate justice. I think it's really critical to continue the linkages between those two movements because you can't pull those apart. And when we think about agency, autonomy, and self-determination and women's bodies and girls' bodies, people's bodies being at the center, climate justice, reproductive justice, and sexual justice are all there together and really linked. And so for me, it's really an honor and a privilege to work for a Global Women's Fund because now more than ever, we need to be getting more and better resources to grassroots women's activists to be able to do the work that they do to change what's happening in our world today. And at Global Fund, we have worked for about 30 years with 5,000 women's groups, including cis, trans, and gender non-conforming folks across the globe in 175 countries. And I just wanted to say that this year we celebrated our biggest grant-making year ever with $11 million to grassroots feminist organizations and 330 grassroots organizations. So in terms of climate justice, since 2017, we've been able to move $100.3 million in grants to support women farmers, leading resilience and food security work in their communities in the DRC, India, Kenya, and Uganda. And we've also made over $800,000 in grants to grassroots women land defenders in Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. And I think it's really important when we talk about funding that we think about our funding in a feminist and trust-based way. And so every time I say anything about funding, I have to say what we've learned and what we know works when it comes to funding grassroots women organizations. So the Global Fund for Women provides multi-year general operating dollars. The acronym is MyGOD. Okay. Multi-year general operating dollars that are flexible and that allow groups to be nimble and do what they need to do. We provide travel and event grants for our grantee partners so that they can get where they need to go, to co-convene, to strategize together, to talk together, to build those alliances together. And we provide specific long-term feminist reconstruction work in terms of our crisis grants, whether it is climate-related or political. And notably, we've been able to support feminist reconstruction in Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi because of Cyclone Idai, and Haiti and many other regions. And I think that it's really important as well that it's not just about money. There's support beyond that money. Grants Plus, and that's in partnership and solidarity. We're all in this together, and so it's about bridge building, supporting communications or strategic advocacy or whatever feminist groups feel they need to amplify their voices and the work that they're doing. And we can do all of that, but it's also really important that at Global Fund for Women, we are advocating for others to do the same. They have to get on board with these feminist funding principles. It's necessary. And so we do a lot of advocacy in other forums with other donors, funders, and philanthropy to really shift the way people are thinking about giving, both individually and also at foundation level. So I think that's important. In our new strategic plan, we're moving into a 3-year and 10-year vision and a 3-year plan. We will be prioritizing women's leadership and climate justice. And this is important also because we want to create the links between our thematic priorities at Global Fund. So as I mentioned, I'm working in sexual and reproductive health and rights and justice. We have economic justice and freedom from violence. And so all of those areas are very linked. And it's very important that we as Global Fund for Women make a commitment to the world, to you, to our constituents, to feminists in our movements, that we are going to be prioritizing climate justice across those areas. This has been said many times, but the women and girls, rural and indigenous women and girls who are disproportionately impacted have done the least to contribute to the crisis to begin with. And we're seeing just incredible aggressive rollbacks to reproductive rights and sexual rights. And that is so linked to climate justice as well. And so we just really need to think about how we're going to disrupt gender inequality and white supremacy and these rollbacks and center those who are the most marginalized in this discussion and who are facing the most oppressions. Because when we work with women with disabilities, when we work with LGBTQI people, when we work with sex workers at the margins of communities, we will all achieve and advance all of our rights. We have limited funds, but we really want to be strategic about what our value add is, and that's why it's really important that we are in these spaces so that we can talk, and as I said, co-conspire, and really collaborate together. So I'm open to hearing ideas and things that we can do better, as we've talked about. But we want to be able to try to fill gaps for grassroots feminist organizations, and we know that large-scale projects involve governments or research institutions that exclude rural and indigenous women, and therefore these interventions are just not as meaningful. And so that's really important for us, is to think about that and breaking down those silos as well, and doing that advocacy. We've had instances where there's been barriers in sort of environmental funders who are looking to us and saying to us, well, you're not funding specific scientific solutions, or what about biodiversity, and are you tracking that, and what's going on, and we know that the women's organizations that we are funding are doing the work, and they have the solutions, so we need to continue to do that advocacy, and that's something that we strive to do every day, but it can be difficult, but it is a role too that we need to play. And then finally, I'll just end with this. We really need to continue, and so many people have said this, that we can't have effective policies without gender justice, without racial justice, without reproductive justice. And so I'm humbled to be in the room with advocates like all of you who have been doing that work in so many global spaces, and really hope that Global Fund for Women can be there to support the feminists that you also represent. Thank you.
Okay, we have some time now to engage with each other. I'm sure some of the speakers were making remarks, you had questions, but very politely didn't interrupt at that point. And there are others around this room who haven't had a chance to say anything, and I'm sure have issues they would like to raise as well. Whoever's managing the live stream, this is being live streamed, maybe we can collect questions from those who have been joining us in that way. But we have a little bit of time now to be able to do that kind of follow-up and interaction, so please.
Hi, I'm Terry McGovern. I'm at the Columbia University Mailman School of Public Health. But I'm
Is that working? I can't.
Is it?
No.
Here,
It says it's the distance from the podium, I believe.
Okay, not my mouth. I am actually a human rights lawyer, even though I'm now in academia, but I do teach environmental justice, and we team up a lot with environmental health scientists who we're getting more and more young women from around the world who are coming in to learn the science, and they're doing lots of interesting work around fracked contaminated water, being endocrine disrupting, all kinds of things. We also have people working on the convention to advocate for including climate refugees. So even though academics often are not so good, although we had an excellent example of working in partnership, I think the new young generation, actually, that's all they want to do. So I just wanted to make a plug for more partnerships. I often assign the students the problems that I hear the grassroots groups talking about that they can't prove. So anyway, just to throw that out, I just wanted to say thank you. This has been hugely helpful, so thanks.
Okay.
Thank you. I think that there are 3 points that come to mind that I haven't heard addressed directly. That are sort of, for me, the big elephants in the room. What do we have to say about the wave of right-wing populist governments that has swept around the world and are very much, in the first instance, responsible for a lot of the quick abuses that people are dealing with? What do we have to say about the fact that they were all elected by, populations? The other thing I think that is a big elephant in the room is the role of the corporate sector. And the ethos agree that it has driven so much of the problems that we have faced. Thirdly, I have an idea that's occurred to me as I've been listening to you talk about the academic world. In terms of the things that I do every day working with indigenous peoples, they have a lot of knowledge that's not brought into the university setting and not elevated into knowledge. But they have some incredible first-hand knowledge. Now, unfortunately, as things go, they may be gone soon. After the extinction of many of the animals, will be the extinction of indigenous peoples. And so with them will go their knowledge of traditional solutions to this kind of work, also an incredible number of languages and with languages is a conceptualization, of the world and, the physical world, and they'll be gone. So, somehow I think that's appropriate to put on the table also. Thank you.
Those are very easy questions, Jay. Richard?
Or if anyone who didn't speak who wants. Yeah, it's right down, that's fine.
Okay, take it down there.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Shidia. I'm a diplomat, human rights expert at the Mission of Lebanon. First, since we started bringing elephants into the room, why not bring the whole herd? I think that the major climate catastrophe that we're having is the political climate, which is not helping the conversation move forward on any level. And what I feel like I need to tap into is the multilateral platform as we know it is being disrupted. So basically when we turn to the UN and we negotiate day in, day out, we have a stalemate because the divides are greater than ever, the cleavage is deeper than ever. And I think the victims are women in the first place, because this is where they go first. They go after women's rights. They go after women's achievements. And so I think the major fight that we're having is on women's rights, with everything that is included on women's rights. And now the climate, which is another aspect, but at the same time, it's a separate aspect being political and economic. And so the players are still the same, the interests are the same, and the victims are still the same. So I think this is like something I feel really like maybe we need to tap into, the multilateral disruptions and the political climate. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for this wonderful gathering, and it's very inspiring. My name is Nader Shamlu. I was formerly with the World Bank, and now I'm happily on my own, and I can put my thumb on whichever skill I would like to do. This is one of the areas. I work a lot on smart cities, gender and smart cities, and as you know, in the next 10, 20 years, about 75 to 80% of the population of the world is going to be in cities, not necessarily in the rural areas. And there's going to be a lot of climate, catastrophe taking place or originating from cities. And I don't think that we have, from what I see, both in terms of research or actions, that we are really focusing on how can we make more and more the cities and the people within cities conscious about climate change. When we say 75 to 80% of the people are going to be in cities, that means that 75% of women are going to be in cities. And how many of those can we make angry to really take action? And I think that in addition to what is happening to women or to marginalized or to anybody in the rural area, we also need to focus on the large numbers of people that are going to be further marginalized, further perhaps put into jeopardy, climate jeopardy in cities, and how much necessarily we can perhaps help to mitigate some of these risks that are coming up. So maybe by the second, this is our first gathering, maybe by the second gathering we can maybe also look at these issues of how do we make cities a little bit more climate conscious. Thank you very much.
Would you like to say something, sir?
Sure. Thank you. My name is Gopal Patel. I run a program called the Bhumi Project, which is a faith-based climate change and development group, and I'm also on the Multi-Faith Advisory Council here at the United Nations. I want to put in a pitch for the faiths, for the religions of the world. That's my lane, and so I'll stay in that. I think with the climate movement, we've been seeing great traction with the religions of the world, from the Pope to evangelical Christians, to the Muslim community, to Hindu, Buddhist, and Jews across the board. And I think to engage the faiths around this area around women and the environment is really an untapped market. I wouldn't say it's an untapped market, but it's an untapped space. In the climate space, in the faith climate space, we don't see many women voices and vehicles and avenues through which women can really speak up. So that's something actually that we've been trying to do. We have a program called Eco Devi. Devi is a Sanskrit word which means goddess. So eco goddess, and trying to popularize that within the Hindu community. So really engaging the faiths in its work, I think, is really important, not just from a mobilization perspective, but also from a framing and narratives perspective as well. I mean, just from a Hindu perspective, again, the earth is sacred, the earth is feminine. The land is sacred, the earth is feminine, the rivers, the trees, the mountains. And so from a Hindu perspective, caring for the earth is a theological issue. But it's an abuse of the divine feminine. And so to popularize that and mainstream that, at least in the Hindu community and other Eastern traditions, can have real traction, I'm sure, in other traditions as well. So one thing is around engaging faith or frameworks and narratives and mobilization. But I want to veer a little bit into the geopolitics and the climate world. You know, we're looking at what's going to happen by the end of this century from a climate perspective, but I also think that from a geopolitical perspective, the shift to Asia over the next century as well, those two issues combined, I think, are very interesting. And I think as the world tilts back to Asia and away from the West, we need to engage the narratives and the people of that part of the world as well, because they bring voices and narratives and values to the table that we in the West may not necessarily have. And so as we try to address the climate crisis, ensuring that we have representation at the table for those people who are not just being impacted now and in the future, but also from a value system, I think that's also important as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Good perspective. Martin?
Can we get a?
Here you go.
Here you go,
Thank you. I'm Fatih Ziai and I work at the United Nations. I'm here in my individual capacity today, and it's been really fascinating hearing the different perspectives on this issue, which I think come together in such an incredible way, because the whole focus on the local solutions, the grassroots aspect is so critical, but then the reality of the political divide, the political resistance, and that is ultimately the way in which global solutions traditionally have been found, and so that obstacle is one that nevertheless has to be taken into consideration. But one thing that was, as a non-expert on this issue, sort of troubling me that I just wanted to put out there is I was reading recently about how the biggest determinant of negative impact on the environment is wealth, and that it's the wealthiest people in the world who are actually obviously contributing in terms of a negative contribution on the impact on our environment. And that is individuals, but also corporations and so on. And the question that I have is just, given that corporations have so readily jumped on the corporate social responsibility bandwagon, that's something they all want to do, and so many big philanthropists and thinking of people in Silicon Valley and their spouses jump on the women's rights bandwagon, and maybe are deeply committed to these issues, but is there a way to bring the advocacy to that group of people who are themselves making that negative contribution? I'm all for the grassroots solution, but coupling it with those who are actually who need to be stopped, as it were, and have the awareness and advocacy brought to them. I'm sure many are doing that already, but given that very small window for action, it seems like maybe some of the attention needs to be focused there. Thank you.
Okay, Bridget and then Sarah.
I think here first.
Who?
Okay.
Rami?
Thank you. I just had one comment, which was sparked by what Gay said and a couple of other people talked about marginalized communities. The research that I've been working on across the Arab world recently, which has looked at poverty, vulnerability, marginalization, and alienation, that string of things that come together, shows that based on the multidimensional poverty surveys, which are the most accurate measures of poverty now that we have, that about 2/3 of the Arab populations are poor and vulnerable. In other words, marginalized groups are now the vast majority, at least in many Arab countries, not everyone. So we have to change our thinking about, we used to talk about marginalized 10% or 15% or people out in the rural areas. The marginalized are now the majority.
Yes.
And they're politically mostly powerless. They have no voice. And this needs a complete really revision of how do we tackle these problems. Because the old ways everybody has mentioned haven't worked. I just wanted to highlight this fact, and for instance, another statistic is the middle class in the Arab world has dropped from 44% to 33%, and it's continuing to drop. So the trends are really frightening in terms of people's well-being. And of course, when you link this with climate change and other discriminations that's going on, it's pretty gloomy. But at the same time, what you see in the Arab countries at least, and many other places, there's constant demonstrations every day across the board for the last 10 years. The Arab uprisings of 2010 to 2011 slowed down but never stopped. If you look at Basra, you look at Jordan, you look at Lebanon, you look at Palestine, you look at Iraq, you look at Morocco, Algeria, Sudan, of course. So these are not reported in the global press. So this raises the importance of working with local researchers to understand exactly what is the dynamic on the ground in terms of suffering, in terms of the resistance against oppression, and looking for a better way to a better world.
Thank you, Rani.
Thank you. I hope that we have more moments to chat. My brain has so many thoughts that I'd love to talk about with so many of you. And particularly on that scope of partnership, I think, we are really limited in resources, not only the grassroots organizations and indigenous women's groups who are working on the front lines, who absolutely need the direct resources, but also those, advocacy, political organizations who are working at this intersection as well. And I think, for decades, those groups and many of our partners around the world are really some of the most under-resourced organizations. And so when and as new organizations come on board or see the gap in this analysis, please do start with partnership rather than creating something new or different, because it might already exist but just not be heard of or have that space. I also wanted to, it's sort of a plea that I've been making with different leaders, Patricia Espinosa, who's the Secretary General or Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC, as many of us, I'm sure, are engaged in Beijing and work towards Beijing plus 25 next year. I can very much see a context where there'll be like several different action areas, with environment being one of them. And I really would like to see that at a conference happening in the context of climate crisis and not where climate is just one thing on the agenda. Because if it doesn't intersect everything, and this is part of when I leave rooms like this where we've talked about how we need to make this intersection, then climate or environment gets added to a list of agenda items rather than understanding how every single one of those pieces is going to be affected or intersects with the context of a climate crisis. I love all the elephants in the room, and I think that one thing that is really important, I love them. I love them being put in the room because the climate justice movement, at the end, this is really about having fierce conversations. We just don't have time anymore to pretend that incremental. I mean, it touched me so deeply when you said, the good. When is the good not good enough? Because unfortunately, that is the point we're at. And I was at this conference yesterday where Colette Pinchin-Battle, who's one of my heroes in life. If you don't know her, please look her up. Yeah, listen to her, follow her wherever she goes. And my vision of the world is her as president in the next decade. But anyway, she talked about, the challenge of sitting around tables, and it's not necessarily, she's like, I sit across from racists every day from the fossil fuel industry. I know what they're doing, and I know what they're saying, and I know where they stay. It's those who sit across from me and claim to have the same principles and then go away and do something different. It's not white supremacy, it's white privilege, she said, was the challenge that she's fighting. And I think that we see that particularly when it comes to corporate accountability. And I have brought into a lot of spaces and probably been called a radical anti-corporate person, which is not. I think, of course, business needs to be at the table when we discuss these options. But right now, it does feel like this desperation to have everyone under the same umbrella of accepting the climate crisis means that we can only roll out the red carpet and say, you need to be here because you have a role in solving the climate crisis, without equally forcefully saying you have a definite role in causing the climate crisis. And also too much focus on incentivizing rather than saying, we are not inviting you to help us solve the climate crisis. You are citizens with the same access to the IPCC report and the science that we all have, and therefore you're being regulated by us, by people's movements and by governments to actually commit to certain things. And so I think that, and just to say that the women and gender constituency at the UNSCCC held a big action in Poland last year, which was tackling the rise of global macho fascism. And so that's become one of our big clarion pieces in the climate justice work that we do, is that we have to tackle head on that there's a deep link with the global rise of macho fascism actually as being underpinning. So I just say I think that we have to tackle those elephants head on. We should always be in rooms like this, not leaving them without saying it, and we have to be really critically analyzing our partnerships, the work that we're doing. Are they good? Are they good enough? And good doesn't have to mean you're not working hard, but it's that more inherent good. Is it good for people? Is it good for planet? It's not easy work. It certainly makes everyone feel a little bit bad, but if we're not doing it, we're not gonna really get to the goal that we have.
It should be global white macho.
Oh, yes, you're right. I'm sorry. Changing it.
I just have a quick point.
No, that's true.
When a lot of the things that have just surfaced, I was listing them, but framing the narrative, connecting to people on the ground, storytelling, bringing the voices of the indigenous populations, their knowledge base to the forefront, tackling marginalized communities and really getting what they're struggling with out front, breaking through the political divide, bringing those that are responsible for impacting the climate, bringing our messages to those people and holding them accountable. And, for me, one of the things that I think we all struggle with, communications. We do not have sophisticated communications. We do not have money in our budgets for communications at the level that we need if we're going to really make an impact. And I just wanted to put this on the table because it's something that all of us who run organizations, we cannot get communications grants. We try to build it into the overhead. We're always, so many steps behind the curve on this one. So I just wanted to get that out and put it on the table firmly because it's a critical point for us if we're going to make a difference.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
I thought I'm coming up with more problems than you do have. It feels good that we all share the same problems.
Yeah.
And more. So I feel that the common theme around the table is that we live in a miserable world. That's very depressing, really. And we are all facing one beast, right? And it really doesn't matter anymore in what country we live in. We are all in the same boat. And that's the good part.
Yes.
Right?
It goes down from there.
So as a scientist, I would like to plead for recommendations that we don't get out of here without at least one thing that we commit to do that will move things forward.
And in our country, we're just pleading that evidence-based makes some sense. We have wound down all the time, and I wonder if our esteemed guest leader, Inspirer Mary, do you have any last words for us?
Well, let me kind of say what a rich and thoughtful discussion this has been, and I am glad that the elephants were raised because we need to have them in the room so we face them. But I do want to remind us that I think we're at a moment, and I've been waiting for it. It wasn't just the children coming out today, it was the People's Summit that we heard about. I was there at the opening of the People's Summit. Amnesty, Greenpeace, Office of High Commissioner, 350.org, etc., faith-based thing, saying we need to connect the dots and have the common ground. And there's a declaration that's on their website that I'm printed with there. Philanthropy is changing, and I've been at a number of philanthropic meetings recently, including a breakfast before the People's Summit, to a realization only 2% of philanthropic funding goes to climate
And of that, probably about 0.2% goes to what we're talking about, grassroots support, etc. So very small, and now there's an awareness that that's not acceptable anymore, and it's beginning to be a thing. I was actually at the Women's Network funding that Global Fund for Women was at in San Francisco recently. I have to watch my carbon footprint, but I'm in the persuading business, so I try to send my voice when I can, but sometimes it's important to be there. It was very interesting to be there at the Women's Funding Network of women's funds here in the United States and the Global Fund for Women, which is the one I'm connected to, because they also took on this issue. There's a lot of awareness that we're in a crisis. And the old saying, if there's a real crisis, please don't waste the opportunity. So I think we need to see the opportunity in this crisis and use it to try to really firm up this broad movement that's more a platform of different initiatives that come together and connect the dots and build the strength to hold governments and business, particularly the fossil fuel business, but business as a whole, and cities and accountable for not doing more on addressing emissions. I actually am a little bit more supportive of the business movement that is genuinely moving, and I'm connected with the B team of business leaders who have made commitments, and I'm holding them to account, and they're reporting, they're using peer pressure with each other, and they are moving, and they're being run by a woman, which is no harm, called Hella Thomasdottir.
She's tough.
She's terrific. And what is happening is more governments and more corporations are putting a stake in the ground and saying we will be carbon neutral, net zero emissions by 2050, whatever the language used is. There's now a coalition of countries that are putting that carbon neutral commitment. I just got Ireland. I shouldn't actually say that, 'cause that's all below the radar, but anyway. And they will be making that commitment at the climate summit. And there are quite a number of countries. There are a significant number of corporations. What they're doing is making that commitment to be zero carbon, net zero, carbon neutral, whatever it is, by 2050, and working backwards. Most of them don't have proper plans yet, but it's the way to go. And I think we need this movement, I'm calling it, to be much more assertive on calling out, and we need, as I said, all that disruption. We need the litigation. We need those shareholders going into corporations and calling them out. Those discussions, the first time that I've heard in the in philanthropy, about where is our money coming from? We need to clean that up, and we need to, I think there's a lot of different ways in which I can see we're going to make more progress in getting to a situation where we at last begin to see that curve bending. We will hear some initiatives at the Climate Action Summit, which will help. But at the moment, partly because the developing countries rightly want to take their people out of poverty, are not getting the investment in the technology for the clean energy. So they're going coal. Japan and Korea and China are exporting coal technology to developing countries because that's profitable and also, so how do we connect all these dots? I mean, I've heard so much that my own mind is whirling a bit, but I am more hopeful because I can see that women are now taking ownership and taking a lead role and saying this problem has to be resolved, and we have very little time, therefore we have to take the opportunity, we have to do it very much with the right voices at the table, with the right priorities that we've heard a lot. The grassroots, the people-centred, and communicating that. I mean, the point about me talking about the 2030 agenda and the Paris Climate Agreement is that governments are reporting on both. They report to the high-level political forum in July. Ireland reported
nobody in Ireland knew that the government was reporting on it. There was no communication. So, so it's a completely different world. I mean, the world of the Sustainable Development Goals is a very elite world, a very insider world. It's grand, but so governments have to be called out to make the 17 Sustainable Goals that they voluntarily committed to known to their people and live by them and start reporting seriously on them. Similarly with the nationally determined contributions. Next year, 2020, they have to be increased dramatically in ambition, particularly in the richer parts of the world. We have a problem in this country, that's one of the elephants. But that's a bumpy time, it doesn't continue forever, and hopefully.
Hope for that.
Yeah. I mean, as you know, Trump said he was pulling the United States out of the Paris Agreement. He actually can't do it until the 4th of November 2020.
He doesn't know that though.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The point is, all the Democratic president-elect has to say on the 4th of November is, we're still in.
As we say, inshallah.
I'm trying to cheer us all up. And I did actually get great advice, and I think some of you have heard me say this before, because I use this example a lot, about hope. I mean, when I wrote the stories about climate justice, 11 stories in a book on climate justice, the byline was hope, resilience, and the fight for a sustainable future. 11 of the stories involve women, but there are also 2 good men. And what I wanted to mention was what I learned from Archbishop Desmond Tutu. We were together at a social good conference, a social good conference this Sunday, run by the UN Foundation. And it's all these young people on their iPhones and their iPads, and they create a big social media buzz. Because that's what they're supposed to do. We're supposed to trend, isn't that the word?
Yeah, trending big.
Yeah, whatever. And when Archbishop Tutu is in front of young people, I mean, he just tells them how much he loves them, his arms go all over the place, and he tells them, they're wonderful, etc. And we were being moderated by an American journalist, and she said very sharply, Archbishop Tutu, why are you such an optimist? And he looked at her and he shook his head and he said, oh no, dearie, and he called her dearie. Oh no, dearie, he said, I'm not an optimist, I'm a prisoner of hope. And I remember at the time, it was like, poof, it hit me there. And I thought about it a lot afterwards. And the truth is, that is what is absolutely needed. It's an act of hope. It's the hope. The glass may not be half full, there's just a little in the bottom, but you work with what's there, and you build with what's there. And that's where we are now. We're faced with an absolute crisis, an absolute emergency, almost too little time. Women haven't been at the driving end of this. Now we have to be. And we have to be with all the other constituencies, including as much business and investment as we can enlist, because they will make a big difference. And Mark Carney in the Bank of England telling investors to get out of being too invested in stranded assets. We need more of that language. If we can move the money out of fossil fuel subsidies, put a proper price on carbon. Angela Merkel is just going to announce a big price on carbon in Germany. There are things going on that we need to, but above all else, we need to be constructively, positively, courageously hopeful, because that's where my heroes are, and that's the heroes that I've written about in the book. I've learned so much from the courage at grassroots when you're not responsible for the issue, it has devastated you, it's completely destroyed your whole community, and you have to pull it all together again. And that takes enormous courage and resilience, and that's part of what we need. And I think the volume of young people in particular coming out will have an impact on the summit. I think we're all human beings, and politicians get very afraid when they get 30 emails or 40 mentions on social media about particular source. It actually, I've been there, I don't know. There's an alertness to a really popular movement. All we need to do is deepen it, widen it, strengthen it, make it more practical, and make it, as my lecturer you said, bring it home.
Yes.
Make it real at home, and then so prisoners of hope, and women have to take charge and control of this issue because it's too important. Man-made problem, feminist solution, supportive men supporting that feminist solution.
And finally, we're going to turn to where we began. WLP brought us together and
No,
Lena.
sorry, I want to say one more thing.
Always.
No, I meant to start by paying tribute to two women, Manaz and the Women's Learning Partnership for bringing us here, but also Milan. For the umpteenth time, you are a wonderfully skilled supporter of other women and supportive of what they're doing and how they're doing it, and you moderate so supportively. You are great.
That's not good enough. So Lena Habib is the executive director of WLP. She also has a strong connection to Lebanon, being from Lebanon, and having run the chapter there. And I think, you know, what American University Beirut represented in this discussion, what WLP represents in this discussion, it finally all comes together with you, Lena.
I don't know what I can say after Mary, but certainly want to continue on an upbeat note, but you reminded me, Mary, not only about when you talk about Milan, there's also another friend who said there's a special place in hell for women who don't support other women.
Indeed.
And I still believe that.
That's true. But
If
they're not in the room.
If my colleagues would allow me, my colleagues in the room, my colleagues in Bethesda, and certainly WLP's President Mahnaz, thank you so much to AUP, my alma mater, Rami, Alison, Ada, thank you so much. I mean, this has been, this actually represents both our organization, the richness, the diversity, the democratic exchanges, the learning, the engagement. So thank you for having us. And I would like to also to say, I don't know how happy you would be, but this is only the beginning, at least for us. We will be reaching out to you to continue our collaboration here in New York, on our main campus in Beirut, and hopefully also in the MENA region, which is basically the constituency of EB. If there's one thing that that is a takeaway for all of us that I want to talk about, and which relates to that, continuing this collaboration, is that activism work and women's activism work. And there is accessible science is available. And citizen science work, and ever since I've met Najat, I've been really impressed by the simplicity of the solution and the ways it could be amplified with proper activism on the ground, which takes me to basically just circle back to the work that we are doing as a partnership, as the movement building that we're trying to work around, the movement building, which an essential part of it is creating and nurturing these spaces for learning and for exchanging ideas across different people from different walks of life. Not those who do not support other women, but amongst those who support other women. The replication that this partnership model has proved, the fact that there have been that has been tried, tested, and proven that actually collaboration through these kind of conversations, plus collaborations on the ground with women on the ground, the linkages that are being made from what we consider a global space here to local spaces such as the one we've been working with. I think it's wonderful for us to see this model working and helping us trying to address the biggest one of the major challenges that we have today. And if I want to link also what we've been talking about to solutions and how we try to pull out solutions from these models through looking at local languages, through looking at local realities, where local realities are actually the realities that will help us
find solutions, ask the right questions. Bridget said something, and I think it was Bridget, fear does not work, but activism does. And I think we all fully agree with this. And what works, and could you just show the little bag that you have as an example of a micro example? We've talked a little bit about refugees in Lebanon. This is a group of 12 Syrian women refugees who are having to deal, who are actually dealing with violence within their own communities, violence from the host communities, violence simply because they are women, racism, exclusion, etc. But at the same time decided in this context that is not hospitable to actually do something to help this context, which is basically help in our famous garbage crisis. By the way, every time we pass through a heap of garbage in New York, Manhas tells me, this looks like Lebanon. And so these women with arts, with organizing, with activism, are actually taken away, used plastic bags from Lebanese households and producing items that are for sale. You're welcome to look at it on your way outside. The other thing that I wanted to highlight are other examples of how this local activism works and how it makes the connection from local to global. Our partners in Senegal have embarked on something called the Kilimanjaro campaign, and the Kilimanjaro campaign is a regional campaign across West Africa, basically looking at women's right to land and using women's knowledge to use the land. And we all know that the issue of land is very problematic in patriarchal societies in terms of access, in terms of control, in terms of ownership. And these are women on the ground, similar to the women with whom Najat is working, who are actually involved. It's not even a local initiative. It's a regional initiative across West Africa. And I can go on and on about other examples that we have within the partnership. But I just want to conclude, and Najat asked us also about something. What are we going to do? In addition to what's going on today, we are embarking toward a main landmark next year in July 2020, which is the 25th anniversary of Beijing, where we're all excited about it, but we're all incredibly concerned that it might be that turning point where the gains that we had in 1995 will be lost. In 1994, during the Vienna Conference of Human Rights, we had this particular moment, powerful moment, which which still resonates until now, where Secretary Clinton said, well, as simple as that, women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. That is the moment that we, all of us, as a partnership, and hopefully with all of our allies and co-conspirators, I love this one, we will be looking towards that. We are reaffirming that women's rights are human rights. And to conclude on this, Gay said something which really I think was important. We need to lay the foundation for a fairer world to get to climate justice. And there have been some formidable ideas around this, and I just want to end with a specific recommendation that Mary, if I may, made, which is making climate justice a personal issue, no longer an abstract issue. And that is, I think, something, when we started talking during Beijing about gender relations, and then as a partnership, and I want to go back to something that Mahnaz always says, which is the architecture of gender relations, of human relations. There is no way that these will change unless it becomes a change at the personal level. And I think we're calling for the same thing, what you have just said, making climate justice a personal issue, no longer a public issue. And in conclusion, I think for this wonderful collaboration with AUB, I think, how do we bring this home? And
what can we think about in the near future, like right after this event, which again, we insist that it's the beginning. So if we want to connect with the youth, with students, with young women and young men, what are the kind of research questions that we could direct, encourage, suggest that would take us to this fairer world? How do we keep strengthening the democratization of knowledge and science so that it becomes a tool for women and no longer something abstract? How do we strengthen and nurture intersectional social movements, which is something that we talked about today, which is, we're no longer in this room, we're not talking as small caucuses, but actually as people who are diverse. And how do we keep bridging, and I think you've given us a wonderful model, Najat, how do we keep bridging academia with local action? And I would like to push it further into academia with activism. So I think that was all that I wanted to say. But again, thank you ever so much to all of you who are here. Mary, thank you. Mahnaz, it's no secret. We were having these discussions to prepare for this forum, like for the last 6 months, and then at the end of the day, there were, one pearl of wisdom from Mahnaz was that at the end of the day, there is no lack of ideas. There's a lack of commitment, and I think that commitment goes back to what Mary is saying: is a personal commitment first, and then how do we take it globally? So thank you everybody for this wonderful conspiracy. Stop us if you read about conspiracy or something.
It's okay. No conspiracy, in a good
I'd
way.
like to come back to this country. So thank you, and thank you for hosting us. Rami, I think the last word is for you.
It's hard to say anything after this incredible 3-4 hours of discussion. Lena has been my personal trainer in women's equal rights for the last 10 years. She has completely opened my mind, or filled my mind where there were blanks of issues I didn't understand. So I was committed early on as a student in the late 1960s in the United States when the women's movement, as it was called then, started.
Yep.
And
Lena wasn't born then.
But we knew that she was coming. So, and I was an early supporter, and I wrote in the student newspaper that this is the right thing to do. But it was really over the last few years that I've understood some of these issues much more clearly, and now I understand these linkages much more clearly. And this is where AUB fits in. And we really need to thank Fuad Laurie, because he's the person who asked me 3 years ago to work with the AUB staff here, with Veda and Allison and Ava and all the others here, incredible staff. And he said, let's use this office to work with people in New York, the UN, North America, etc. And we looked at ideas and we came up with different things, and this is one of them. So we really need to go back and thank him, but we're also going to ask him for more money to support some of these activities. But we will continue to look at what we do best, which is research, teaching, mentoring students, advocating publicly as individual scholars. I'm a journalist masquerading as a scholar, but still I use both sides of my life. And networking with other people. We've learned that universities like AUB and many others have this incredible advantage of being able to bring together people. And we will continue to do that, working closely with you and others, and looking at next steps where we can take these many ideas and zero in on 2 or 3 areas where we can have the most impact. And we'll continue to interact with you, I'm sure, over the years. So thanks for doing this, for having us as your partner in this initial Climate Justice Forum. We look forward to many more.